It's a Monday mailbag. Let's talk about Heston Kjerstad's debut in Baltimore.
You are Locked On MLB Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes. Welcome on in to Locked On MLB Prospects, your home for all things minor league baseball. I'm your host, Lindsay Crosby, freelance baseball writer and podcaster. Thank you for making this your first listen every single day. We're probably part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. And today's episode is made possible by our friends at Sleeper. Swing for the fences on Sleeper picks, and you can win up to 100 times your money. Download the Sleeper app, use promo code LOCKEDON, and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions do apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details, but they're currently operational in over 30 states, so check out Sleeper today. So the Baltimore Orioles called up one of their top prospects in Heston Kjerstad, 2020 first rounder, number 2 overall pick out of the University of Arkansas. He went 1 for 4 over the weekend, was a pinch hitter on Friday, went 1 for 2 as the DH on Saturday with a home run, and then was a pinch hitter, went over 1 with a strikeout on Sunday. And I want to talk about a bit about who Heston Kjerstad is and what he can do, as well as some of the conversation that came up surrounding Heston Kjerstad before his debut. So again, second rounder in 2020 out of the University of Arkansas, and really non-typical development timeline for Heston Kjerstad. Drafted in 2020, there's no minor league season, right? There's no rookie ball for him to go to. There's no short season stuff. There's no fall ball for him to go to. And then he is diagnosed with myocarditis, which is inflammation of the heart muscle. And the way the medical treatment for that is to, in essence, don't raise your heart rate for a year. And so Heston Kjerstad, in essence, gets drafted after 16 games in a COVID-shortened year and doesn't play organized baseball until 2022. He does Single A Delmarva, High A Aberdeen. He goes to the Arizona Fall League. And then this year debuts in Double A, does Double A, Triple A to the bigs. And the numbers are fine for the time he was in the minors, but there's this narrative around Heston Kjerstad that he's old because he was 25 when he made his debut, and that he doesn't have power because he had to build all of that power back after spending a year plus unable to, in essence, to do physical activity. If you're into fantasy baseball and you're on fantasy baseball Twitter, this was a whole thing on Friday afternoon. It was a capital B big deal. And so context is important for Heston Kjerstad. So what he did this year, debuted in Double A Bowie, 46 games there, 310, 384, 576, 11 home runs, 24 extra base hits, 15 walks to 31 strikeouts, and 3 of 6 on stolen bases. That's a month and a half or so. After that, close to 2 months, he goes to AAA Norfolk in the International League. And this is technically, he is below the average age in AAA when he gets to Norfolk. And we're going to talk about that in just a second, about age to level and why we care about that and what it means. But in those 76 games in AAA, 298, 371, 498. So within striking distance of a 3.45, but doesn't get it in any of the categories. 10 home runs, 34 extra base hits, 27 walks to 69 strikeouts, 2 of 3 on stolen bases. So who he is as a player. One, he's not a center fielder. He played a little bit in the Arizona Fall League, but this year he played 49 games in right, 16 in left, 38 at first base. He is a corner outfielder / first baseman, which that's a common profile. You see it quite a bit. There's multiple guys on this Baltimore roster right now who fit that same profile. He struck out just over 20% of the time in AAA, 20.7%. He walked just under 10% of the time, 8.4%. His contact rate wasn't on its face that impressive, 74.8%. But his in-zone contact rate was close to 90%, 87.7. And the reason why that complete contact number was significantly lower than his zone contact is because Heston Kjerstad chases a lot. 36.7%. It's not unreasonably high, but it is high. And when you go out and you break out the numbers, and again, we have StatCast numbers for AAA. I'll talk about where some of this info comes from in the second segment in response to a question. He chases some of everything. He chases fastballs 37% of the time. He chases breaking pitches 35% of the time. He chases off-speed pitches 36% of the time. He chases some of everything, right? So he is willing to expand the zone. But the good news is he has the power to punish you when he expands the zone and gets to a mistake pitch, right? So his average exit velocity in AAA, 89.5 miles per hour. His 90th percentile exit velocity is 105.1. And if you remember, we talk about looking at 90th percentile exit velo versus max, because 90th percentile is, by its very nature, more emblematic of what you're actually able to do versus your max power, which could be one fluky hit and nothing else. That sounds dumb to say that, but 90th percentile on the average tends to be more predictive of your power level than your whatever your max exit velo happens to be. Max is always fun. If you crush a ball incredibly hard, it's always fun to talk about, but 90th percentile is more illuminating. So he has the power to punish you when you do one of those hits. And we saw on Saturday night, he broke up a no-hitter with a solo shot. It was a 1-1 cutter in on the hands, and he launched it out for a home run. So the thing with Heston Kjerstad, and again, I referenced the fantasy baseball issues on Friday night on Twitter, or Friday afternoon, whatever it was, is there were some fantasy baseball analysts and things like that who were down on Heston Kjerstad, both in the moment and long term, because he's old for the level and his power production in previous seasons wasn't that great. And for context here, his slugging percentage over 43 games in high A Aberdeen, so last year, was 362. He had a 674 OPS in 43 games in high A Aberdeen. And when pressed, some of those fantasy baseball analysts, like the big part of it for them was he's old for the level of his production in AAA, and he didn't necessarily have great power production. So when we talk about age to level, and for context, this is the age the player is versus the average age of that level of the minors. It's different for hitters and for pitchers. You can get this on Baseball Reference. When you pull up a player, there's a column under batting. There's year, there's age, and there's age difference. And that's either a negative or a positive number. If it's positive, they were older than the average. If it's negative, they were younger than the average. And that average is different for hitters and for pitchers. For 2022, because 23 technically isn't over across the full minors yet, for 2022, the average hitter age in single A was 21. The average pitcher age was 21.9, so almost 22. In high A, the hitter age was 23.1. The pitcher age was 22.5. On average, pitchers are older than hitters in single A. Hitters are older than pitchers in high A. In double A, they're practically the same, 24.2, 24.6. And then in triple A, pitchers tend to be a little bit older because it feels like you see more quad A guys and veterans trying to make their way back in triple A on the pitching side versus the hitting side. It's 26.6 as a hitter versus 27.3 as a pitcher. Now, the other part is that this is all players in the level, not just rated prospects. So the higher you go up, the more those outliers are going to skew the averages, right? But the reason we care about age to level is really for two reasons. One, is there additional physical development to be done for this player versus the average player in that level, right? So if we look at, say, Ethan Salas, and we look at the power production of Ethan Salas, we say, I'm not actually that impressed. You look and you're like, oh, yeah, Ethan Salas slugged 229 in high A, or he slugged 214 in double A. But he's also 17 years old. He's 7.5 years younger than the average player in AA. There is more physical development to be done with Ethan Salas. We should care more about things like hard hit rate than we should care about just straight slugging percentage. That's why inputs are important here. And then the context of this too is the other reason we care about age to level is the experience. When we talk about a guy being old for the level, the inherent argument that we are making is that this guy being older means that probably he has more experience in professional baseball, in minor league baseball, whatever it may be, than the average player that is there in that league. And if he has an additional year of experience in AA versus somebody else, he should be able to outperform the average player. That's the other argument that we're making when we talk about age to level. And in Heston Kjerstad's case, it's not a valid argument to talk about age to level in the context of experience because he lost 2+ seasons for reasons outside of his control. So from a development standpoint, he is a 23-year-old. From a game experience standpoint, he is a 23-year-old. And just presenting he is old and he had below average power production in high A without that required context doesn't accurately paint the full picture of who Heston Kjerstad is as a prospect. In just a minute, I've got a question from Andrew about a pitcher in the Brewers organization and then also where we get some of this data. And we'll talk about that next right here on Locked On MLB Prospects. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Jase Medical. Modern medical care and treatment are important, but global supply chains are fragile, and things like pandemics, natural disasters, and foreign travel may cut you off from the treatment you need. Jase Medical is your solution. You fill out their online form. One of Jase Medical's board-certified physicians will review it to determine what medications are safe and appropriate, and then Jase will send your prescription to one of their partner pharmacies where your order will be filled and mailed directly to your home. And you can send your physician a message for answers to treatment-related questions at any time. Everybody should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. And that's why Jase Medical offers the Jase case. It has antibiotics and other medicines that you may need during the course of a natural disaster, while you are traveling off the grid, things like that. You go online, it is very simple and easy to order. I just went through the process. It couldn't have been easier. And right now, you can save more than $360 on the retail price by getting these life-saving antibiotics with Jase Medical. And our listeners get an additional $20 off by using the code LOCKEDON at checkout on jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. Okay, so back to our mailbag. Andrew had a question about right-hand pitcher Carlos Rodriguez of the Milwaukee Brewers. He's had fantastic results, and Andrew wanted to know if he was going to be a top 100 prospect next year. And I don't quite think that he's going to get that high, but I absolutely agree that he's been underrated and probably hasn't gotten the attention that he deserves. So, 2021 sixth rounder out of junior college, and he has spent the entire year this year in Biloxi pitching for the Brewers AA affiliate, the Biloxi Shuckers, who just lost out on a postseason berth to the Montgomery Biscuits. 25 starts this year, 9-6 with a 2.77 ERA and 123 2/3 innings. 152 strikeouts, so 11.1 per 9, 253 walks, 3.9 per 9, and 10 home runs allowed. He won the Minor League Pitcher of the Year award for 2022. And again, I do think he's underrated compared to a lot of other pitchers who put up those kind of numbers in AA. And his numbers were remarkably consistent in the first half and the second half. We've talked about how a lot of pitchers benefited from the tacky baseball and how their numbers in the first half didn't quite hold up in the second half. Carlos Rodriguez's numbers are remarkably similar, and the reason for that is he's not necessarily getting by on an exceptional fastball or really any exceptional pitch, right? Fastball sits 93 to 95, which is perfectly average velocity for a righty. He's got a curveball in the mid-70s. He's got a slider in the mid-80s. And the star here is really this above average to plus changeup. Sits in the low to mid-80s, a ton of fade to it, right? And so hitters they think they can square it up and they can't necessarily do that. The question coming into this year was, yes, you've got multiple pitches. None of them are great, but you can mix them up pretty well. You can sequence them pretty well, and you can spot them for the most part where you want them. The control was considered to be average. The question was, how good can this stuff actually be? You've gotten by a lot on pitchability. You've gotten by a lot on sequencing and just not letting guys square you up. But can you actually blow the pitches by guys? And I think he showed this year that, yes, for the most part, he's added some velocity. He can get this stuff by guys, but he's still fundamentally going to be a pitch to location sequence guy more so than a stuff guy. And so because of that, I don't quite think there's the traditional ceiling you would expect from a pitcher in the top 100. I think MLB Pipeline only has 8 or 9 pitchers in their top 100. And so it's already hard to break that grouping. But Carlos F. Rodriguez, we have to clarify, there's a lot of Carlos Rodriguez's in baseball. But Carlos Rodriguez really feels like a back-end starter to me, more so than a front of the rotation or even middle of the rotation guy. He feels like a number 5, number 4, who takes the ball a bunch for you. He has 123 innings this year. It's only 16 more than he had last year. So I absolutely think now that Biloxi's season is over as of Monday, you may see him bumped up to AAA to make a start in AAA for the last week of the year. And then you probably will see him invited to spring training to open next season. But ultimately, it's not a profile of pitches that give you a lot of idea as to a high ceiling, right? He's not missing a ton of bats with any of these pitches. He's living off of you're looking for the fastball and he runs the changeup in on your hands. Or he has a decent slider that if you're not sitting on it, you're probably going to swing and miss on. But if you're sitting on it, it's going to get rocked. So Carlos Rodriguez, I like him. I don't think he's a top 100 prospect, but I do think in this organization who doesn't have a ton of great pitchers, he's probably a very valuable prospect. I did get a question on YouTube this week about where we get all of this info from. I talk about 90th percentile exit velocity and things like that. And so, and like how we gather all this data and where we get all this data from. And so I think it's important to talk about not everything is like, we don't know for sure a lot of this stuff. I talk about a number 4 to number 5. That's a judgment that I'm making based off of, one, how effective I think the pitches that I've seen will be at the major league level, but as well, what other places who have seen these guys pitch, what they have determined like is a reasonable projection as well. So I do my best to combine a bunch of different sources of data, if it's when I'm giving you like an exit velocity and things like that. If they are in AAA or they are in the single A Florida State League, we have StatCast data on them. I have a StatCast dashboard that I can search by hitter or by pitcher and get tons of information because they're in a StatCast park, and that is public from MLB. That data, for the most part, is available on every minor leaguer, but I don't have access to that. There are people I can reach out to and say, hey, I'm looking for Jet Williams's average and 90th percentile exit velo. I did that last week because I had a question from Jeremy. I wanted to give him a good answer, and I was able to get that data, but that's not public information. And that's not a data set we have access to. And so what I do is I try to watch as much minor league baseball as I can. A reminder, you can MLB.tv, whoever your favorite team is selected as, you can watch that affiliate's games. So I do that. And then I read a lot, whether it's Baseball America, Baseball Prospectus, Fangraphs, Keith Law at The Athletic, a lot of people who spend a lot of time in the prospect world. I listen to their podcasts. I read what they write. I watch the videos they put out, trying to understand more about baseball and more about prospects in particular. And then I've learned that there's certain people, whether it's in fantasy baseball, Chris Clegg's a great example of this, or a website that is dedicated to a specific farm system, a specific organization's minor leaguers. There are folks who spend a lot of time at minor league baseball games, watching games, giving you live looks at prospects, who have good scouting eyes and can tell you if this swing is athletic enough or if this pitcher has a smooth arm action or not. And I mentioned Chris Clegg, the Dynasty Dugout. He's one of the sources of, if I haven't seen enough video on a player, I can go look to see what he's written on a player to have a kind of like a second opinion on what this player might be, how good this guy might be, and or to see if there's things that he noticed that I may have missed. And a lot of what this job is, doing the daily prospect podcast, a lot of this is understanding kind of what the consensus in the prospect apparatus is about this guy or that guy, and bringing that to you in an easy to understand way. I'm not always giving you original analysis. I try to the best I can, but I am one person. There are a lot of prospects. I think the big takeaway, and it's something I've said for a long time, is don't be afraid to pay for content. There are a lot of people out there who have a Patreon or a Substack or a small website that are doing fantastic work, and they deserve your money. They deserve your time, your attention, your eyeballs, your ears if it's a podcast. And so find those sources that know what they're talking about and understand the case that they are making, and then look to see how that case that they made interacts with your thoughts about the player and adjust as needed. Make a note, hey, I need to go back and watch this guy. Curtis Mead's better on defense than I thought he was. Let me go back and watch some more of him because I had him lower than 4 other places did. Things like that. In just a minute, I've got a question from Ryan talking about the Brewers about the Wisconsin Timber Rattlers. And we'll do that next right here on Locked On MLB Prospects. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Sleeper. The MLB playoffs are just around the corner, which means the clock is ticking on your chance to win 100 times your cash on daily fantasy. Baseball has never been more exciting than it is right now with studs like Ronald Acuna Jr. and Mookie Betts. All you have to do is pick more or less on stats for these stars like home runs, hits, strikeouts, and more for up to a 100 times payout on Sleeper. Get your picks right, and you could win big. Use promo code Locked On. You'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Now, terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. But they're operational in over 30 states, so check out Sleeper today. So Ryan asked about the Wisconsin Timber Rattlers, high A affiliate of the Milwaukee Brewers. They're in the Midwest League in the West Division, and about what happened to their season, what's going on. So 62-68 was their final record, and was remarkably, I'm gonna say mediocre, and I'm not gonna mean that rudely. I'm gonna mean that as in they were just a couple games away from a 500 record. They were -3 runs on run differential for the season. So they were remarkably close to being right at neutral performance in the Midwest League. Now, the first half was much worse than the second half. In the first half of the season, because a lot of the minor leagues, there's a first half champion and a second half champion in each division, and they'll meet, and the winners of those will go and meet for the league championship. They were 26-38 in last place in the West Division in the first half of the season, -29 run differential. They got better in the second half. They were 36-30 in the second half with a +26 run differential. They tied for second. And when you go back and you look at what happened to this team, it was really a lack of power as a team. They only had 3 guys finish the season in double figures for home runs. And that was Joe Gray, Alex Hall, Ernesto Martinez. Joe Gray played 101 games with 11 home runs. Alex Hall played 78 games with 11 home runs. And Ernesto Martinez played 67 games with 10 home runs. So it was a lack of power as a team. And then the starting pitching wasn't as effective as they wanted. They had a lot of guys who started a lot of games, but the ERAs were not necessarily great. It was going back and looking here. Tyler Wassenaar starts 22 games, 6-7 record, 4.02 ERA. Cameron Wagner, 22 starts, 6-11 record, 5.67 ERA. Steven Cruz, 19 starts, 7-6 record, 6.90 ERA. Alexander Corneal, 18 starts, 4.55 ERA, 1-3 record. Like, you can see a trend here. Edwin Jimenez, 15 starts, 4.5 ERA, and a 7.5 record. And because of this is something that happens in minor league teams, right? When you're in that middle level of organizations, when you have a prospect that comes in and does really well, they get promoted, right? Jacob Misiorowski opened the year here. He made 6 starts. He was 1-0 with a 1.90 ERA. They moved him from high A to double A. They promoted him. And this happens sometimes in the minor leagues, but the offense wasn't able to produce runs to mitigate for the starting pitching not necessarily being locked down, right? And when you look at some of the prospects who were there, they got a lot of prospects who were either not big power guys or guys that were injured. So Robert Moore, 123 games there. He was the competitive balance pick last year out of the University of Arkansas, played second base in 123 games, 233, 321, 361, 8 home runs, 44 extra base hits, 55 walks to 108 strikeouts, and 26-39 on stolen bases. He could get on okay. It was an adjustment year for him. He wasn't necessarily amazing, but he was good enough, and he was 21 for high A, so he was right there, just a little bit younger than the average age in high A. Reminder, that's 23.1. But he wasn't necessarily able to generate the power production that you would need to drive guys in. Now, he did show you that he could cover shortstop, and so his utility profile at the major league level looks a little bit better than it did. He covered shortstop because Eric Brown got injured. He was the first rounder last year out of Coastal Carolina. The shortstop got in only 63 games this year. 265, 362, 347. 4 home runs, 12 extra base hits, 32 walks to 48 strikeouts, again in 63 games, and 37 of 42 on stolen bases. You can see how Eric Brown could be a catalyst to make your offense go, right? But that's also an issue of there's not a ton of power there. They just didn't have a ton of guys who were hitting for a ton of power. The highest slugging percentage for anybody that played more than 30 games was Brock Wilken, the 2023 draftee at third base, who played 34 games in high A with a 438 slug. So it's one of those, it's a sample size issue, but it's also just they didn't get the right prospects. And you'll see that a lot at the minor league level. Outfielder Luis Lara finished the year there. He was an IFA in 2022. He got 17 games there towards the end of the season. 290, 351, 377. No home runs, but 4 extra base hits. 2 of those were triples. 5 walks to 15 strikeouts. 8 of 9 on stolen bases. Looks like a guy that could be a catalyst. You put him and Eric Brown together at the top of a lineup. Guys that could absolutely cause some havoc on the base paths. Could get guys over, could bring guys in, could score plenty of runs. You can see how you could build a competitive team next year. But so much of so much of your competitiveness at the minor league level is based on what prospects you happen to have and what level the minor league free agents are assigned to. There was a couple guys, when you look at the roster, like they were the oldest players here. I think it was Sam Gardner was signed as a minor league free agent at age 26. He pitched in 21 games here, picked up a couple saves, 2.22 ERA in 44 innings. Like, you're lucky to have a guy like that. And then a lot of the leaderboard here is guys who were rehabbing. Julio Teheran came through here. Brandon Woodruff came through here. Gus Varland, Aaron Ashby came through here. The minor league level, they're not necessarily focused on wins. Now, some of these organizations understand how financially valuable it is when you can win a game and get to the postseason and what that postseason gate can do for the players from an emotional standpoint, but also from a revenue perspective. But it's not necessarily guaranteed. And it's just this year, things just didn't go great for Wisconsin, for the Timber Rattlers. It's a cool ballpark. It's a cool team. They're doing some development and some improvements on the ballpark. Going to be fun to go watch. Just things didn't work out well for them this year. But with that draft class that they had, next year looks like it's going to be much better. Fantastic week this week. We're doing tons of stuff. Our breakout prospects of the year. We're doing a show for each league. That's coming out soon. I'm talking about the guys I was wrong on this year. That's going to be a fun one as well. In the meantime, if you have questions for the show, tons of ways to get them to us. Whether it's subtext, Discord, email, Twitter, all of that's in the episode description. All of that's in the show notes. Until tomorrow's show, remember, it's always a great time to pay a minor leaguer.